Pumping for Putin, how Australian drivers are unwittingly helping to fund Russia's war on Ukraine. We track the oil shipments.
In reality, Australia is funneling significant cash to the Kremlin.
Thanks for your company. If you filled up your car today, there's a good chance you now have so-called Russian blood oil in your tank. And that probably comes as a shock because the Australian government has banned it from being imported.
But it's still arriving on our shores. In fact, we've never shipped in more, all due to a legal loophole that many people want closed.
This is what funds Russia's war machine. Shipments of blood oil being pumped out by Putin, returning a lifeline of cash to the Kremlin. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we joined much of the world in taking a stand.
Australians always stand up to bullies, and we will be standing up to Russia.
Sanctioning Russian oil, banning its import.
There must be consequences for Russia's actions.
Yet their oil has kept coming.
Right now, we can see through some clear publicly available data that some of the fuel that comes into Australia does have Russian origins.
Since the 2022 sanctions came into play, Australia has imported more than $6 billion of products containing Russian crude, arriving via a loophole that allows us to bring in Russian oil if it's been refined by a third party.
So if it's come via an intermediary and been refined in another nation, then we still can and indeed do import fuel which ultimately still is made from Russian crude.
This is just one of many examples. A shipment of crude leaves Russia on February 15 and arrives in Brunei on the 3rd of April. It's refined. A week later, a tanker delivers oil directly to Australia. If 15% of oil at a refinery is Russian, is there any way that we could argue that we're getting the other 85%, that we're still all right, we're not getting the Russian oil, or is it just not how these refineries work?
Most refineries very much struggle to separate batches in terms of, it's all the imported crude oil is kind of mixed.
Most of this remixed Russian oil comes into Western Australia, followed by Sydney and Melbourne.
I would like to think our government is competent enough to at least be aware that this is going on.
It seems the rest of the world is. You track the use of this oil globally. How much of a concern is Australia? How do we rank?
Australia is the single largest buyer of oil products made from Russian crude in the world.
In fact, the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air claims we've never bought more. Its data shows Australian imports from refineries that process Russian crude have increased 46% this year. We're now bringing in more than before the Ukraine war began, and it's clear why.
The global oil crisis is now a real-life game of battleships as giant tankers are targeted in the Strait of Hormuz.
Is there any evidence that Australia is becoming more reliant on Russian crude oil, or perhaps more lax, more open to it since the supply issue on that front?
Yeah, this is a really good observation. So this year, we've seen an increase. Reliance on these refineries that are using Russian crude oil has gone up quite significantly.
And would it also be a bit cheeky for Australia to use the war in Iran as an excuse, saying that, oh, look, we've got no choice, we need this oil, because we were doing it long before the war in Iran, weren't we?
Exactly, yeah, this is a very important point that you make.
For Ukrainian Australians like Kateryna, it's personal.
Publicly, Australia says that it stands with Ukraine. In reality, Australia is funneling significant cash to the Kremlin.
Are you concerned that given the current fuel crisis, we might see more of this oil come in?
Yes, we are absolutely concerned.
Do you also fear that the appetite in the community to cut this out might be reduced if they're just worried about getting petrol in their car?
I haven't come across a single person that said, I don't care about where it comes from, I just care about the price. And we've had people say that they're willing to pay extra money for fuel that they know is not blood oil.
And avoiding it is impossible, no matter where you fill up.
There's simply no way to know where that fuel's come from. And the truth is, it all gets mixed together.
The government is well aware. Last November, the Senate referred the effectiveness of sanctions against the Russian Federation to an inquiry. Numerous submissions have shown Russian oil is being imported.
It's a betrayal of Australian values. Australia stands for what is fair, what is right, and this is not fair and it is not right.
The inquiry should have reported its findings in March, but its deadline has been extended.
We've heard lots of different reasons, lots of excuses. There just needs to be the political will to get this done, to do the right thing, close the sanctions loophole, and stop financing a war machine.
And we, of course, contacted the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, for comment and gave him a whole week to have a chat to us, but he declined. His office also refused to answer our specific questions, but did say the Australian government is focused on securing oil supply. We don't want to see Russia benefit from the conflict in the Middle East to fund its unjustified war against Ukraine. And Denham, there are probably many Australian drivers who agree with that they don't care where the oil is coming from as long as it keeps coming. But the issue here is transparency. It's about being upfront about it. The government is telling the world and the Australian people one thing while allowing the opposite to happen.
Yeah, I'd be interested in a cost of living crisis if it would make a difference to people. But like you said, it's all about choice and people aren't being given that.